of the TEW with Dark Side of the Ring Companion. Um, we're going to be booking the Grahams today, or, well, in this case, I've got Billy and Mike Graham, who aren't actually brothers. Billy Graham is a kayfabe brother of the Graham family. But I think actually he would have been Eddie's brother anyway. He wouldn't have been Mike's brother. Would he have been? 17 years. How old's Mike? 37. Yeah. Let's see. Billy Graham, 46. Okay. So I guess they could have been. I think kayfabe was that Billy Graham was Eddie Graham's youngest brother. Um, and I think Mike Graham would have been the oldest of Eddie's boys. Really, the only one of Eddie's boys. We'll know more because we have some great resources at our disposal. We're gonna have the Dark Side of the Ring playing, and they're gonna be able to tell us a bit more. I will say I've got the Road Warriors match, them retaining the tag team title belts that they won just recently. And a few other good matches on this card. The Ric Flair Kerry Von Erich match should be pretty nice. But yeah, I think without further ado, I'll probably jump right into the show here. We're going to see how good Mike does in this tag team match, and we'll probably give him some singles action later on. Okay.
I don't know that there's been any family in wrestling, either
Trigger
related
warning,
for real or
suicide, self-harm,
that had as much impact, as much reach, and as much influence as the Graham family did.
Graham was the hardest punch in wrestling history.
Eddie Graham was not only a great wrestler
Eric and
and a
Mike.
great promoter, he was a visionary.
Terrible
Eddie's
chemistry.
championship wrestling from Florida. It was built on wrestling, and the main events were violent. He gave the people the circus.
Eddie Graham coming back into that ring after killing.
Eddie Graham was a titan of professional wrestling who ruled his era and passed on his iconic legacy to his only son, Mike.
The son of any great athlete, they've got the scrutiny on him. But Mike Graham didn't take shit off anybody.
I think maybe he felt like he had to be as good as his
Wow.
father.
Brody
Mike
had a
Graham
93.
followed in his
That's
father's
crazy.
footsteps to wrestling greatness and also descended into his own dark world of pain, addiction, and grief.
The wrestling culture is very cutthroat. You have to
Number
have
5.
this thing about you
Pretty
where
good.
nothing's going to break you.
He was under tremendous pressure from so many different angles.
Mike kept shit to himself too, like his father. The apple didn't fall far from the
100.
tree.
It all gets pushed
Beautiful
under the rug.
match.
In certain families, who are you supposed to go to for help?
The tragic legacy of a wrestling dynasty, haunted by self-destruction and suicide.
It is with a deep sense of regret that I announce the untimely death of a friend, colleague, and a leader.
It was like somebody dropped a bomb on all of us.
Grandfather, father, and then the kids. That runs in the family genes, right?
Once that spotlight's gone, or once you don't have that ring, like, it's emptiness.
Championship Wrestling from Florida was one of the most respected and successful wrestling promotions of modern times. The legacy of the Graham family in Florida is they meant professional wrestling to millions of people all over the state for almost 30 years. One member of the Graham family was on the card or in the main event or behind the scenes in the glory years when they were selling 1 million tickets a year just in the state of Florida to see live matches. And their TV ratings were Super Bowl level.
I guess I was used to it. Like, when you don't know what's different, it's just what your life is.
Finished
I just
first in
knew
the
that
battle.
was a huge part of, like,
Hell
my
yeah.
grandfather and my dad's life.
On our way to winning the war.
Bassett, and Eddie Graham was my
Oh, wow.
grandfather, and Mike Graham is my father.
And that's Eddie Graham and these
We are winning the war. Holy shit, I didn't know.
Every Sunday, they'd have matches at the Eddie Graham Stadium. And the first phone call in the morning was my grandfather calling my dad to talk about the night. We'd wake up and we'd walk into like our family room to see who was crashed out on our couch for a little while, because we had different wrestlers sleeping on our couch at times. Magnum TA, Terry Allen, when he first started, he slept on our couch. And he was so sweet.
They dropped
so I
quick.
was pretty accustomed to having big, boisterous personalities and people around. The one that scared me was Andre the Giant. When he came like crouching through our front door, he freaked me out. Yeah, I was scared.
That's reasonable to be scared of Andre
That was the
when
family
you're
business.
little.
Everybody wanted to be on the roster of Championship Wrestling from Florida, both for the money, for the weather, for the girls, and also to learn from Eddie Graham. I'm Jim Cornette. I've had a 40-year career in professional wrestling, but for even longer than that, I've been a collector and an historian. Eddie could make you believe that he was the toughest man in the state of Florida, which is exactly what most of the fans believed. He just had a magnetism about him, and he was somebody that you wanted to listen to, and if you were working for him, you wanted to follow. A leader, a general.
Well, I was born up in the Tennessee mountains, brother. If you didn't have heart and desire, you were finished to begin with. So I ain't gonna lay down and quit. That's my bottom line.
There you have it. The comments from Eddie Graham. There goes a wrestler, and one hell of a man.
Eddie was a legend in Florida. He could get a reaction just walk into the ring. My name is Kevin Sullivan. I work for the Graham family for decades, and I've been a wrestler for over 50 years.
Your nightmare is just starting.
Eddie was about 5'10" and a half, wide shoulders, bleached blonde hair, and he just had a presence about nobody else was ever in his class. The genius of the business, our Einstein. Eddie was from the hills in Chattanooga. Very difficult life. His father died young.
Eddie came up through the College of Hard Knocks. Just a good old tough country boy. My name is Dottie Curtis, and I am the wife of the late Don Curtis. Don was a very, very knowledgeable wrestler. Don and Eddie met back in around 52, I think it was. They became friends, and Eddie asked Don to come up here to Jacksonville, and he was the promoter up here for quite a few years.
Now it's Graham with a good solid chop across the throat.
Eddie Graham is probably one of the finest wrestlers that was around in his
I
time.
thought Godfather was a freelancer.
I don't
If he's
think
not,
there would be another Eddie Graham.
Though born Edward Gossett, Eddie's wrestling career is forever altered when he adopts the Graham name from one of the ring's top stars.
The originator of the Graham wrestling family dynasty was Dr. Jerry Graham. He had the bleached hair, and he carried himself like a star, and what's more, he had the gift of gab.
so it starts with Dr. Jerry Graham.
Brother teams in New York were over at the time. But if you could find a guy that looks something like you, nobody's reading your birth certificate, just say it's your brother.
Fair enough.
Eddie Gossett was in Texas wrestling as Rip Rogers, and a lot of people told him, "You look like Jerry Graham." Jerry and Eddie connected,
Yep.
and in
I've got
1958,
Candido.
the Graham brothers, the Golden Grahams, as a
Tammy
team,
should be
ruled the
debuted
roost
now.
in wrestling in the biggest TV market in the country, where wrestling is already red hot, being presented in the most famous arena in the world, Madison Square Garden.
Dr. Graham has just the treatment for that tired, nagging backache. Eddie performs the surgery while Jerry looks on approvingly.
If you could sell out Madison Square Garden, you could sell out anywhere.
Eddie and Dr. Jerry made a fantastic duo, hated by everybody, and just really drew the crowds in.
And just main eventing Madison Square Garden, they were probably making close to 6 figures per year in 1958 and 1959, and that would translate into somewhere over $1 million a piece in today's money.
With money and fame to burn, Eddie and Jerry are box office sensations. But before long, Dr. Jerry's behavior outside the ring becomes even more notorious than his matches.
Dr. Jerry Graham, as big of a genius as he was in wrestling, was an alcoholic, was mentally ill, and he got in a lot of trouble and caused a lot of trouble. Jerry Graham, to impress fans, used to light his cigars with $100 bills. Or he would walk into a biker bar and walk right up in front of a guy and say, "Hey, my name's Balls. You got any?"
That'll get some
The most
attention.
shocking incident involving Jerry Graham transpires years later in his hometown of Phoenix, Arizona.
One day he got the word that his mother was sick and in the hospital. And he called the hospital and he told the doctor that his mother better come out of that hospital in good health. And then she died. So Dr. Jerry Graham shows up with a 12-gauge shotgun, a 38 caliber revolver, and an 8-inch long hunting knife, and appears in the intensive care unit where he fires a shot at the doctor, and then goes down the hallway and grabs the gurney that his mother's body is on. And as he's taking it down the hallway, here come the orderlies and the interns, and they're trying to tackle him. So he grabs his mother's corpse and slings her over his shoulder. And he's screaming, "I just want to take her and bury her." Jerry Graham was so good at his chosen profession, and he was also completely, utterly insane. After 2 years, Eddie Graham could not put up with being partners with Jerry Graham anymore, and he had to leave the greatest spot that he'd ever had.
In 1960, Eddie uproots his family from New York and settles in Tampa, the hub of championship wrestling from Florida.
He was a visionary. He said to himself, "I know my capabilities as a wrestler. I can get over here. I can be the star. And this whole thing can be bigger." And over the next 25 years, not only did he become the most successful wrestler in the history of Florida and the most popular, but he worked his way into being able to buy into the promotion, then taking it over completely, and expanding wrestling in the state of Florida, and made it the place that everybody wanted to go to wrestle and to learn.
Eddie probably bought the territory just knowing that he had the wherewithal, the brains, the connections with the talent to take the
Hart family in WWF has no hearts in it.
Hi, I'm B. Brian Blair, and I started wrestling in Florida in 1977. Got my start right here in Tampa.
Blair has him up, the airplane spin.
The Armory was hot. I would call it like Saturday Night Fever. It was so entertaining.
Tonight, we're in a jam-packed Armory in Tampa, Florida, the home of championship wrestling.
All the wrestlers from Championship Wrestling from Florida gave their all every Tuesday night at that place. Growing up in Tampa, these wrestlers were just huge. Fans would come up to them. We couldn't go anywhere without someone wanting to talk to my dad or my granddad.
And it was telling that Eddie Graham would have continued good relations with Vince McMahon Sr. and later on with Vince McMahon Jr. He was someone that the other promoters all called to ask for advice.
The president of the NWA, Eddie Graham, now describing the conditions in the contract. Both wrestlers are to post a...
The National Wrestling Alliance was an organization of promoters from regional territories all over the country. And there was no major decision made in the NWA without consulting Eddie Graham.
He was president twice. He was well respected, but he was a complicated guy. Eddie would do some violent things.
He was a tough person. You either did what he told you to do or you were out.
Now, there was the side of Eddie Graham that did want to keep the credibility of the wrestling business, and guys were expected to lay shit in to make people believe what they were doing was real.
Eddie Graham was a stickler. He said, if anybody here gets their ass kicked by a mark, you're fired. In other words, you get your butt kicked by a wrestling fan, you're out of here. You protect the business at all costs.
I guess you could call it maybe a horror chamber down there at the sportatorium, but fellas would say they want to wrestle, and they figured all you had to do was get in the ring and perform. They'd put them through their paces, and, you know, some of them would just, they couldn't take it.
I had to do things that I'm not proud of, that I didn't like to do. A couple of them I did. Well, they wanted you to break people's bones.
Somehow, this guy got booked for TV. He said, oh, I've worked some local shows. I'm a butcher by trade. And I see Eddie's ears perk up like a dog's. And the guy says, I'm gonna make you look good. I'm gonna tell all the guys you're a nice guy. So the guy drifts off in the corner and he said, if he doesn't come back bleeding, you're through. I kept my job.
Your marching orders were to make this guy bleed.
I had a family. At that period, it was my livelihood. Wasn't his livelihood. He was going to go back to that job no matter what. Worst thing I probably ever did.
Eddie's hard-nosed ambition to dominate the wrestling trade is all-consuming, but his desire for power is far from his only flaw. Wrestler and promoter Eddie Graham is known for his unrelenting drive, limitless ambition, and his determination to legitimize the business.
Eddie was a go-getter. He had a portfolio of a lot of property. He expanded outside of the wrestling business. He wanted to write checks rather than receive checks.
Eddie wanted to elevate the perception of wrestling. That's where he started getting involved with the Boys Ranch and with charitable organizations in every town and every county in Florida. They're furthering amateur wrestling programs.
Eddie was a rock star in Florida. I mean, politicians were kissing Eddie's ass. To be seen on Championship Wrestling from Florida when you're running for office was a big deal. And I'm sure Eddie got favors from that too. Eddie was involved in everything.
I think Eddie put a lot of pressure on himself. He never wanted to fail in anything he did. And for most of the things that he did, like flying and being a boatsman and that, diving, he was fabulous. His only problem was that alcohol got to him. One night, Eddie was drinking and decided he was going out on his boat. And his son, Mike, was panicking because he took off in the car. And so Mike, as a young boy, he got on his bicycle and he drove to a cross bridge over the water. And his idea was he was going to jump off that bridge and onto the boat because he was afraid his father would kill himself out in the water. And thank God he missed the boat. I mean, it wasn't there. Because if he'd have jumped off of that bridge, he would have possibly drowned in the water. That scared Eddie. That was one of his sobering moments, if you want to call it that. Mike idolized his father, and vice versa.
I believe you told me that your own boy does quite a little wrestling.
Well, yes, he does. In fact, I'm hoping he'll take the state tournament in the 95-pound division.
How old is he?
He's 10 years old.
Even though he's a lovable father, he was demanding. He put high expectations on Mike.
And then when my dad started wrestling, he obviously started wrestling under Mike Graham. So maybe that gave him a little bit more of a chip on his shoulder at times.
At 222.5 pounds, Mike Graham.
He gave me all the tools to get as good as I could get before I turned pro. But even at that, the pressure really, and a lot of it came from him. And I loved going someplace where he wasn't going to be, because I knew I could go out, I could wrestle, I could come back, and it was a constant scrutiny.
My grandfather did throw my dad in the ring, be like, okay, let's see what you got.
Graham breaking up again, arm drag takedown.
I remember my dad always saying, Nicole, don't worry. The bigger they are, the harder they fall. So he was not intimidated by anyone's size.
Mike was shorter and didn't have the same over-the-top personality, but he had the wrestling knowledge in there from growing up with Eddie Graham.
And there it is. There's a fall right out of the blue. Mike Graham.
So he was a very good worker. He was in plenty of great tag teams, but the attention never went on him specifically. And to be honest, he didn't want to be the top guy. He didn't want to be the big star because people would have said it was because of his father.
Mike swallowed a lot of shit, you know, and let things go. He did it as well.
a good thing Mike never had that desire to be the top guy because he's not going to be in this company. There's just too much talent. He's just a little too old. He's 38. He's lucky he's getting this win over Raven. I gave it to him really because I feel like we can give him a run. We can give him a good run. I don't know how likely it is he'll catch a title shot or anything, but we can give him a little bit of a run while we're here, focused on him, focusing on the Graham family today, and give him a bit of a shot. In this one, it's he's running a badass gimmick. Kind of goes in as the odds-on favorite to win, even though Raven is a younger, maybe more athletic, definitely a little bit taller, and overall maybe gonna eventually become a bigger star. But Mr. Graham here is no slouch. Mike knows his stuff, just like Cornette was saying. He had that wrestling knowledge, and yeah, I think that we can give him a W here. Raven will have his day, and Raven's got plenty of opportunities. Raven has plenty of times that he's held a belt and will go on to do big and better things even in our company than Mike will have the opportunity to do. But over here tonight, Mike's going to go over. Mike's going to get a little bit more screen time. Yeah. Let's give Mike a little bit more screen time.
Well, if not better than anybody I ever saw being a promoter's kid to blend in with the guys.
Graham after Kevin Sullivan.
I had the pleasure of being his partner, and I had the pleasure of being his opponent.
Leave this.
They're going to hang him. I get violent, Sullivan. I'm waiting for you.
If you go to Mike's bad side, you were on his bad side, and he wasn't going to back down. He knew the pressure he was under. He couldn't go home if he got his ass kicked.
My grandfather was bloody all the time, right? My dad also was bloody. So mornings in my house, my mom would get my brother and I up. My dad would be in bed because he'd get home so late and he was just hungover and beat up. And we'd go in to kiss my dad goodbye in the morning. And there'd be tape on his forehead with blood and bite marks on his finger and the smell of alcohol oozing from his body. And we'd kiss him goodbye. See you later, Dad. Have a good day.
Let me turn right now to Mike Graham because I know he's...
As the 1980s dawn, Mike Graham joins Eddie in steering the ship at Championship Wrestling from Florida, as the company becomes a breeding ground for wrestling legends, including Hulk Hogan, Ric Flair, and Dusty Rhodes.
I am the dream. I am the man. Go on with it, baby.
Dusty was like the original surrogate son. He loved Dusty, and Dusty loved him too.
Dusty Rhodes, of course, was always around. We all got to the beach together. Dusty would always say that fat looks better tan.
Eddie Graham took Dusty under his wing, and he became the most popular wrestler in the history of the state of Florida.
When Dusty turned babyface, the territory was on fire, and all of us became so close. We were like family.
And now the ring beginning to fill. Jerry Briscoe charges in, Don Serrano, Brian Blair, and a host of others.
As this younger generation elevates the territory to a whole new level, Eddie, now in his 50s, decides to quit the ring for good, just as his pursuits outside of the business begin to bring him trouble.
There were a lot of things going on in Eddie's life. He was torn between two women. He was in business with some shady characters. I could tell that Eddie was drinking too much. He was maybe taking too much medication. He had a lot of struggles in his life, personally.
When he came back in the plane at nighttime, there was a store that was open, and he could get a cheap bottle of wine there. Every time he was driving, he would chug-a-lug that wine down, and he would take the bottle and he'd throw it out of the car into the grass. And he came home one night and the place wasn't open, and he was so desperate. He went out into the field there and he groveled around in the dirt and found all these bottles And he sat there in the field and drank the dregs out of those bottles. By this time, alcohol had taken over. He couldn't stop.
That's rough. Very rough.
Consumed by his alcoholism and burdened with personal and professional troubles, Eddie Graham struggles to find meaning beyond the ring.
Over time, people forget who you are, right? My grandmother told a story about how they had gone to a restaurant and they didn't know who he was. He wasn't in the spotlight anymore, but I remember my grandmother being like how he was just not himself after that encounter.
When that career is over, who are you? Who's looking back in the mirror?
One of the last checks my grandfather wrote was to a liquor store for $8. And in the memo, it said peace of mind.
Damn.
I think if anyone's had time of their life and they just can't find comfort within themselves and they feel like everything's out of control, you just don't have that peace of mind, and he couldn't find it. He turned 55, and I had gone over to my grandparents' house, and I was roller skating, and so I was like skating around him in circles, and I'm like, so what'd you get for your birthday? He's like, 55. And I was like, 55 what? He said 55 years. Looking back, I realized he was telling me that he was done. That he got 55 years is what he had.
I was at the Super Bowl. The Miami Dolphins were playing the San Francisco 49ers. They paged me, Mike Graham, please come to the box office. I walked into the box office and said, hey, my name's Mike Graham. Like, paged me. And the woman goes, oh, yeah, you got to call home. Call home. What's wrong? What's wrong? What's wrong? It's your dad. Wow. Dad. What's wrong with my dad?
Beautiful match.
His wife, Lucy, went out, is what she told
Such
my
a
daughter.
tragic story.
And when she came back, he had shot himself not once, but twice. That's what I heard from what the coroner said, and I will spare you the gory details about the bedroom.
He's in the hospital and he's hooked up to machines, and a family member has to say to unplug
Extreme
him or
bedhead.
keep him alive.
Oh no.
And I got back home the next morning and went to the hospital, and there he sat back in the corner, his head all bandaged up and everything. I said, well, it was no accident. So I looked at Mom and I said, Mom, you know, we got to do it. He wouldn't want to be here like this. So we went out. I said, okay, bullet. And he lived about 5 minutes.
It was shocking. I mean, everybody was in a state of shock.
It is with a deep sense of regret that I announce to you at this time the untimely death of a friend, colleague, and a leader, Eddie Graham.
I immediately started crying. I couldn't believe it. I mean, why? Why, Eddie? Why would you do that to your son, to your grandchildren?
We were young, but my brother was like, if he loved us so much, how could he do this? My brother was very attached to my grandfather. Yeah, very attached.
I think that people knew he was depressed, but they never thought Eddie would go that far. He was keeping that to himself.
I think he bottled a lot of it up because he didn't want people to know he wasn't as strong as his outside persona was. He realized that if he let people know he was weak, that there were people that would love to have just walked in and taken over. And I think he was probably fighting for the territory, too.
We hear the news. Eddie Graham's dead. And holy shit, what's going to happen to Florida? We found out within a year, Florida was on its last legs. Vince McMahon was starting the national expansion in 1984, and the territories were going out of business because Vince was trying to suck up all the talent.
When WWE started robbing the territories, Eddie saw the writing on the wall probably much earlier than most of the people did.
A year before Eddie passed away.
Yeah.
He's no longer toxic.
Yeah, big time.
Tell me about that.
Well, Dusty left.
Wow.
Took the
Wow,
whole
they're giving
crew
him.
with him.
They're giving
Dad
him
had spent
peanuts,
years
yo.
getting Dusty over and creating Dusty Rhodes, but when Dusty left, he took half the territory with him. And that really made Dad mad. It was like he was almost trying to kill the territory for taking all the talent with him.
In 1984, Dusty Rhodes leaves Florida to work for Jim Crockett Promotions. With
About
the
that?
wrestling industry in chaos,
How about that?
Mike Graham is still reeling from his father's death when he inherits the daunting task of leading the territory.
Mike picked up like a man, ran the territory, and, life went on.
Mike was obviously attempting to fill his father's shoes. It wasn't just him trying to do everything, but it wasn't the same place.
Where have you been? You've been home. Okay, shut up a second.
They even ran an angle after Eddie's death. The Freebirds were down there and they were trying to heat things up, and they thought, well, if we desecrate the memory of Florida's most popular wrestler ever, then the fans will hate us.
Like father, like son. You're both losers.
Eddie would have wanted Mike to use his death in something that enhanced wrestling.
I'm gonna prove to you that he was more of a man than the three of you ever be, as long as you live.
Why are they offering him so little?
It was too far. It was too much. The fans could tell it was desperation.
I know he hasn't
because
been in
they
the
could
ring
see
in
the crowds
like a year and a half, but
At the time, things were already shifting because cable TV was starting to come out, and my dad was
Scandal
just
has blown over.
trying to keep it afloat. And
Week 1 of
no matter what
October.
he did, it wasn't going to quite stay afloat.
Struggling under the weight of Eddie's absence, the once great
He
territory
had divorce,
lasts just 2 more
sex
years
scandal,
before closing its doors.
released.
Eddie would have been the only one to be able to save it, because of all of the NWA promoters of every other territory in the country, the one guy that had the best relationship with Vince McMahon Sr. and would have had one with Vince Jr. was Eddie Graham, and he was gone.
Mike and I were at a bar having a couple beers and just talking about his dad, and all of a sudden he broke down. I could tell that his dad not being there weighed heavy on Mike.
I feel like he was a
every
couple of months away
single
from
day.
not being freelance
Already
anymore.
grieving the death of his father and the loss of
He
their
refused
family's
it. He
wrestling
refused
empire,
it. We're leaving him
Mike
freelance.
Graham
We're
is
leaving him.
soon to face another devastating tragedy. Following his father's death and the collapse of their company, Mike Graham must now forge a new path outside the promotion that has defined his life's work.
This should be an interesting matchup. Mike Graham and Diamond Dallas Page to take on Bill Kazmaier and Jushin Thunder Liger.
By that point, Mike was closing in
I
on
gotta send
40.
some people
He
to
got
Dev.
a position with WCW, and he was trying to help mentor some of the younger guys. Obviously, people who knew Mike and knew Eddie respected him, and etc. But I think, unfortunately, he never made his mark in WCW as anybody with a lot of pull, because he was just one of the soldiers at that point.
Right in the face!
I think that when it shifted and it was more theatrics, it was being written by people that had no idea about wrestling, he got a little bit bitter because he was old school. My dad was definitely not a corporate guy.
Mike never reached the pinnacle of Eddie's dreams, but he still had a very successful wrestling career, and he was a good businessman.
He had a great
I like
lifestyle.
Jackie on this
lived
roster.
underwater. He had a multitude of boats. He won a bunch of offshore races.
My brother loved racing boats, and so my dad and brother actually got the chance to race a couple times. My dad never wanted to sit still. He would always be like, yeah, you sleep when you die. He got his first tattoo when he was 40, and it was like a skull with like fire coming out of the head and a lightning bolt going through it, and then underneath it, it said peace of mind. So my dad would always talk to my brother and I about it. peace of mind. Like, if you don't have it, you have nothing.
But like his father before him, Mike's search for inner peace often ends at the bottom of a bottle.
He had 2 driver's licenses, actually. One legally under Mike Gossett and one under Mike Graham. So Mike Gossett got 1 DUI, then Mike Graham got 1. And then his drinking got so much worse. After my grandfather passed away, he was miserable. And he changed. Normally, you know, my dad was not like that. He never showed that side to my brother and I. It was always just upbeat. More tough to like my brother, I think, because he wanted him to be a strong man. Stephen did have to fight and prove that he wasn't a wimp growing up, because he was from a wrestling family and he did have kind of like a stronger build. I think everyone expected him to be some tough, mean guy. I think that hurt him in the long run, but he just kind of never found his stride. We talked every day, you know, text, phone call, whatever. I sent my brother text in the morning. He didn't respond. I just thought he was working or doing something. And then my dad called me, asking me if I'd heard from Stephen. And I was like, I'll go check on him. And so that's how we found out that he took his life.
Whew. Very tragic.
When I found my
history
brother,
of
I
the Graham family.
Ran outside and I called my dad first. My dad was saying he'd be there. I'm like, no, don't come here, don't come here. And so once I was able to leave, I walked into the kitchen with my dad and he said, it's a good thing you found Stephen, because if I would have found him, you'd be burying both of us, because I'd have taken my life right then and there.
It just floored me. I don't know what the demons were that got him. Again, now here's his sister, poor little Nicole, you know, just distraught. His dad, everybody distraught, you know. It just didn't have to be.
I wasn't expecting it at all, because Stephen and I went through and saw how hard it was with my grandfather. We saw what it did to my dad. We saw how it absolutely destroyed our family. But with my grandfather doing what he did, I felt that it made it an option. It turned into something that my brother felt, he did it. Now we have my grandfather and my brother, who is my best friend, you know, and I found my brother. So everyone was so worried about me, but I was worried about my dad.
Haunted by the death of his son Stephen in 2010, Mike Graham struggles with the pain of losing another family member to suicide.
I think every parent blames himself. He said, I must have been a shitty son and a shitty father. Pretty heavy.
Sometimes we're our own worst critics, and we're hard on ourselves about different things. And I think that, you know, there's many things that Mike could have thought about, and it was just another one of the things just knocking on the bad side of his brain.
You know, between his dad and now my brother, he just absolutely was crushed.
Mike and I were close, but we weren't that fuzzy, good feeling close. And he called me up and said, hey, you know, I love you, right? I said, I love you too, Mike. And that was it. He hung up the phone.
My dad met my daughter and I at a park, and I was like, Dad, this ends with Stephen. I'm like, look at her. She doesn't deserve this. What your dad did was horrible. What Stephen did, we're never going to recover from it, but this ends now. Look at her. She doesn't deserve this. And he was like, you're right, Nicole. You're right, Nicole. You're right. But less than 2 years later, he did the same.
We was in Daytona Beach, bike week or something, with his wife And from what I gather, she went outside and said she was going to go see some friends.
When she got back and opened the door, simultaneously, she heard a gunshot.
Oh.
And
Just a
there
minute too
was
late.
Mike, dead in his son Steven's cowboy boots.
That's rough.
He couldn't break the cycle.
You can't see what's behind the person's eyes. They're telling you one thing, they're smiling, but they may be, they may be just absolutely torn up inside. Then you realize he's gone. End of story, No more. There's no more.
I mean, I was still trying to pick up the pieces after my brother. Again, it was less than 2 years apart between my brother and my dad. After the conversations I had with my dad, asking him, telling him, begging him, please, this ends with Steven, it was just a different level of pain.
Mike had been away from wrestling for some time, and I hadn't seen him in years, but then the news comes out, and that was a shock. Even if you're not shocked at anything in wrestling, you still think, well, the same thing can't happen to 2 different generations. They can't do the same thing. And it happened to 3 generations. You just, how much, same family, how much more can go on?
The pattern of suicide that haunts the Gossett family reaches far beyond Eddie, Mike, and Steven. This heartbreaking cycle of tragedy actually spans 4 generations and 5 men.
A lot of people don't know this, but Eddie's father killed himself. And also, Eddie's brother Skip killed himself. It's a very vicious cycle when you have more than one suicide. One suicide is one too many, but when you have multiple suicides within the same family structure, it's just tragic.
My only explanation or thought, because I'm not a doctor, obviously, but is that when one happens, then it makes it viable for someone else when they're having a hard time. And also the fact that depression and addiction is hereditary. And unless you have someone step in and recognize it and get help and let them know that it's not normal what you're feeling, but it's going to be okay. That just wasn't quite happening in my family.
Big time lesson I learned, because it isn't just the people that go, it's the people that are left behind. Heavy burden for Nicole to carry and heavy burden for her daughter.
That's a tough one.
We are at the old armory, which is now the Brian Glazier Jewish Community Center, and Larry Simon, who was Boris Malenko, who my grandfather had huge feuds with, his son helped put this together in a way to commemorate all the wrestlers that came here every Tuesday for many, many years. So it's pretty great to see, actually. This is my dad and my grandfather.
Mike and Eddie Graham have won the Florida Tag Team Championship.
Nothing could keep the fans away. This was the home of the Titans of Tampa, and this will always be the house that Championship Wrestling from Florida built.
I think wrestling fans should know that they absolutely respected the fans. And I hope that the fans that met them felt that. There was so much good, so much laughter, a lot of good times, and those are the things that I focus on more than anything else because they were really exceptional people. I remember Eddie, my papa, as bare-chested with a cast net off the dock catching mullet for us. A lot of love, a lot of love. My brother, my bestie, my best friend, I just wish he knew how everyone loved him and wanted to be there for him. Dad. We had that tough relationship because I called him out on things. But there was so much love and respect. I miss my dad so much. I wish he was here to see my daughter grow up because he's missing out on a lot, but that I miss him.
Some of the best times of my life were with the Grahams, and with all the people that the Grahams brought in, there is a plethora of good times. A plethora of good times.
They're friends of mine. Enjoyed my time with them. Wish we could have had a lot more days.
The thing to do is not dwell on the bad. Dwell on the good. That's what gets me through. Nicole, love her. Love her. She's the legacy of that family.
And my grandfather being silly with me always.
And it took me a while to get to a place where I felt like I could finally offer some type of assistance. And so I found the Crisis Center of Tampa Bay, and they offer amazing services. And I feel that I've come to a point in my recovery and healing that I can hopefully get a word out there that may strike a chord with someone to make them call for help. Or
Almost left
survivors
Mike off
that are
the
struggling
card.
to get out of bed because they've lost family members, to know that they should live their lives to honor those that they have lost.
There has to be a lesson to everybody that's watching this program that if you feel suicidal, there's help's right around the corner. And I don't care who you are, somebody loves you, always.
You have to just make that step by reaching out to someone just to say, something's not right. I'm having these thoughts. Just speak up is what I'd ask. You can have fame, family, money, but if you don't have that peace of mind, you have nothing. My grandfather and my dad clearly didn't have it, and my brother didn't have it, but it occurred to me less than a year ago that I have it. And I had been wanting to get a tattoo. I'm not a tattoo person. And all I wanted was my handwriting that says peace of mind and a semicolon, which represents mental health, suicide awareness. Very simple. And it's just an amazing reminder of where I've gotten with my life and how I feel and peace. I have so much to be grateful for, and I'm going to live my best life because that's the best way I can honor them. I am so happy right now. Things are great. My daughter's thriving, amazing friends, family. I'm really happy, actually. So, show?
And this is the suicide hotline number. As this was a pretty dark episode and covered those themes a lot, it's really rough. Not even not to compare tragedies or kind of sorrows and griefs, but definitely the roughest episode since the Von Erich episode, I'd say, as far as just how tragic everything was. Other than maybe the Grizzly Smith episode, this is the episode that is the hardest to watch for me, at least. The Von Erichs is tough too. I think in season 1, they weren't going as heavy on some of the more dark elements to the Dark Side of the Ring that they do a better job of covering now in this 4th season. Another reason is because Kevin, the remaining Von Erich, is very defensive of his father and how everything went. So maybe there's some stuff that they left out of kind of to leave some stuff out for Kevin. But yeah, definitely a tough one, and couldn't imagine the pain of being in that family. Either one, but the Graham family in this episode, very tough. Takes a lot for them to just carry on. When some people, like she said, it was a thing where one made the other one seem more viable, like a more viable option, and just a trend that went poorly for sure. Don't know what else to really say to that or to add on to that. I know that our next episode here. Well, let's see. Is Randy coming? It looks like we're gonna have him, despite what Elizabeth likes. He's married to someone outside the wrestling business. He's a successful musician. So he married someone else outside of the wrestling business in the time that he had this scandal. I think our next episode is either going to be Chris Candido or Randy Macho Man Savage, one or the other. Just to get Randy's rust out of the way and everything, we'll probably do Candido next. So next week, Tuesday, TEW Tuesday, we will be here, Dark Side of the Ring in it, with Chris Candido and Tammy Sitch. Jim Cornette was IRL the guy who broke them into the business. So in order to kind of make everything fit perfectly in this, Dark Side of the Ring series I'm trying to do here, I moved his debut up by about a year. And then I moved Tammy's up by about 2. But as Jim Cornette, as that's the character I'm playing in the game, I feel like, maybe he was able to get wind of Candido a bit sooner, get wind of that Tammy was his girlfriend and that, she had a good in-ring presence to be a manager and stuff. So, with me running one of the, well, let's see. Let's check the record books. Let's just be sure here. With me running the world's most successful company, maybe I had an opportunity to break them in a little earlier. So we're going to be debuting Chris Candido on the main roster. Let's see. What his whole developmental plan is looking like right now. Has he done any matches? He has no matches. So we will be debuting him completely. A very fresh face for the company. And he's going to debut with Tammy. But that's next episode. Just a week out. So, yeah. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe. See you in the next one.